Thank you, John. Next we have Hank Vandenberg, Professor of Economics at UNL and a board member of Nebraskans for Peace.
Thank you. I just want to add a few numbers here. I'm not going to give a long talk here, but I think it's important to focus on some very important numbers and keep those in mind. I'm going to round off a little bit, but these numbers are quite realistic. First of all, a lot of the discussion we see in politics today is about our deficit. Well, indeed, our deficit this year is going to be something close to $1.5 trillion. That is, we are only paying for 60% of what our federal government spends. 40% we are borrowing. And that's a big number. And when we talk about cutting the deficit, we've got to make some headway there. So keep that number in mind, $1.5 trillion. It's also about 10% of our total GDP in the economy. So our deficit, total deficit, is going up by about 10%, not counting interest payments. How do we make a dent in that? Well, again, as our previous speaker mentioned, we argue about $700 disability payments. That's not going to do it. We need to find some big numbers. The discussion has avoided defense almost entirely. Nobody wants to bring it up. It's kind of like, well, yeah, there's something there, but now let's move on to the next item. Well, what are the next items? Well, the next items start hitting pretty close to home. Some of those are mandates, Social Security, Medicare, other commitments. Certainly, our government has to make its interest payments. We really can't decide not to do that unless we want to default. We'll have some go on. But what's left? Well, there's this so-called discretionary expenditures. Of that, defense, when you add up all the numbers, is over half of discretionary expenditures. And the total there comes to about our total deficit. So if we're going to cut our total deficit, we'd have to cut all discretionary expenditures, including defense. If we don't want to touch defense, and defense is over half of that. In fact, if you add the numbers up, if you remember the article I wrote some time back for Nebraska Reports, you have to add in a lot of things. And we'll take some things out of the non-defense discretionary expenditures and put them in defense, things like national security, CIA, Veterans Affairs. Those sort of really belong as part of the overall defense expenditures. Then you end up with kind of a 60-40 split there, like 60% of total discretionary expenditures are military, and about 40 military-related or closely related, and 40% are defense. Why are we focusing on the remaining 40%, and we won't touch that 60%? That is really the incredible dialogue that we're witnessing. In other words, we're completely unrealistic in what we're discussing. We have to talk about defense, and that's something that I hope all of you pass on. You all discuss with people that start saying, well, we got to cut this or that, and they won't touch defense. There is no way that we can even begin to talk about the deficit without cutting defense. And again, I'm still a very firm believer in our earlier discussion at Nebraskans for Peace and our earlier demonstration in the year. We can probably cut this in half, given that we're close to half total world expenditures are ours in defense. The remaining expenditures, most of those are from countries that are allegedly our allies. So why do we need to spend over $1 trillion when you put all the pieces together on national defense? And why can't we cut this? The answer is, of course, we can cut quite a bit. And I would say that exit Afghanistan is the way out of both Afghanistan and our budget problems. And I'll leave it at that for the numbers, but keep those in mind. Again, defense is well over half of discretionary expenditures. We would, to eliminate the deficit, have to cut all discretionary expenditures. Now, again, we don't have to eliminate the entire deficit, but we have to eliminate a lot of it. It has to come out of defense. To not touch defense, people are simply not realistic, simply fooling us to think that we can make any dent without touching defense. Thank you.